Hello, class. So we are continuing on in the endocrine chapter. We've talked about the hypothalamus. We've talked about the endocrine system, hormones, chemicals secreted by endocrine glands that travel into your bloodstream and affect target cells. It's a means for controlling different parts of your body somewhat quickly, usually not as quick as the nervous system, but can control for longer periods of time, uh, hours, days. So that's the endocrine system. We talked about the hypothalamus, um, antidiuretic hormone, growth hormone. We talked about the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary, and the posterior pituitary. Remember, the posterior pituitary doesn't actually create its own hormones. Its hormones come from the hypothalamus. And now we're getting into sort of moving from most superior, moving inferiorly. We stop next at the thyroid and parathyroid glands. You may have probably heard of the thyroid glands associated with metabolism, but also has an association with your calcium uptake, which is also very important. We'll discuss that in this chapter. All right, so let's go through the slides. So starting off with the structure of the thyroid and parathyroid glands. All right, so your thyroid glands, they secrete thyroid hormone and calcitonin, okay? Two very important hormones that your body uses for your metabolism and for your calcium uptake or control of your calcium levels in your bloodstream. All right, it looks butterfly shaped, right and left lobes, connected by an isthmus. Microscopically, so it talks about it here. You have these multiple spheres. You see these little spheres if you looked at it really closely under a microscope. These follicle cells, and at the outer edge of the follicle cells, you produce and secrete thyroid hormone. Another important aspect is this colloid, this protein-rich gelatinous material, which is the precursor for the thyroid hormone. It also contains a high concentration of iodine atoms. Iodine is going to be very important in your thyroid gland producing the thyroid hormones. The T3 and the T4, you have to have iodine is involved in that process. That's why people have issues with the thyroid. A lot of it has to do with some of it has to do with your iodine. And then we have also parafollicular cells, spaces in between adjacent thyroid follicles, and that's where we produce our calcitonin, another important hormone created by the thyroid gland. All right, so that's a diagram showing you the thyroid gland. Notice it has a blood supply. A hormone has to be released into the bloodstream. Also, all the cells in your body require blood. So you can see that here in this drawing, right at the just the thyroid gland, just inferior to the larynx, right? Resting right on the trachea. You'll learn from the next class, Anatomy Physiology 2, you'll learn that trachea is our airway. So very important structure in regards to our lungs being able to receive oxygen and also to get rid of carbon dioxide. But that's a whole separate point. All right, so just showing you where the thyroid is located. These are the parafollicular cells, also your follicle cells, right? So this is where you're creating the calcitonin and then creating also the thyroid hormone. The actual parathyroid, so there's two glands that are here, parathyroid, the thyroid and the parathyroid. The parathyroid, 3 to 5 separate glands on the posterior towards the back, posterior surface of your thyroid gland. And they secrete PTH, which is the parathyroid hormone, from what we call chief cells. Right, so notice here, notice the trachea, notice the esophagus. The esophagus sits right behind the trachea. So the trachea, that's where that's your airflow. Esophagus, that's where your um, liquid and solid food flows down. So the esophagus leads to the stomach, trachea leads to your lungs. And as you can see, so that's so we're sort of looking at it. We're looking at sort of like your neck, but from the back. So we're in front of the spinal cord, but we are behind the trachea and the esophagus. Okay. All right. So that's just showing you the location of the, that was showing you the location of the parathyroid and the thyroid. All right, so now we get into the thyroid hormone. Right, what is the actual hormone that is hormones that are produced by the thyroid gland, and what is their purpose? What do they do for our body? Remember, the endocrine system controls our body, basically helps us maintain homeostasis by controlling different aspects of the body. So just remember that sort of overall theme as we look into this. All right, so the thyroid hormone consists of an amino acid core bound to either 3-thiodithyroxine 3 or thyroxine 4. It's T3 or T4, and iodine atoms. Okay, so T4 is commonly converted to T3 in some target tissues. T4 lasts longer in the body, but T3 is more active. Right, so it's a little side note. They're both amino acid hormones, but more hydrophobic than other amino acid hormones. Remember, amino acid hormones tend to be hydrophilic. Right, so these T3 and T4 enter the target cell nucleus. Right, so they don't bind to receptors on the plasma membrane, but they pass through the plasma membrane and bind with receptors on the nucleus, enter target cell nucleus bound receptors, either activate or inhibit gene transcription. So that means they are passing through the plasma membrane into the nucleus and affecting gene transcription that's in your DNA. Right, so we know that this T3, T4 is going to work, it's going to pass through my plasma membrane into the cytosol, then through the nucleus and affect my DNA. But then now what is it going to do? Right, so this is what people talk about when they have issues with their thyroid. People have problems either gaining weight or losing weight. Right, so they have thyroid hormone has a regulation of your metabolic rate and thermoregulation, sets your basal metabolic rate. So what does that mean? It increases ATP consumption. Right? So your thyroid hormone helps you increase your ATP consumption, helps you burn more, increase more ATP, which is what your cell uses for energy, right? Gluconeogenesis, breakdown of protein in skeletal muscle and fats and adipose tissue, right? So making glucose, breaking down fat, and reactions are the same in tissues that build proteins and fat. All right, so it causes these different reactions to happen. So what is metabolism? Metabolism is a summation of your body's reactions. That's what metabolism is in anatomy and physiology. Metabolism is not just, I have a high metabolism, I lose weight. It's not just that. What metabolism is a summation of your body's reactions. So your catabolic and anabolic reactions. Thyroid hormone increases your ATP consumption. So the use of ATP in your body and it causes more reactions to happen in your body. So your body is technically working harder. But look down, it says there's no, that third bullet point, thyroid hormone increases the rate cells carry out both catabolic and anabolic reactions, leads to no net change, right? So you have catabolic reactions that break down. It also increases the rate of anabolic reactions that build up, so that there's no really net change in breaking down and building up. What does this cause? Remember, or you may not remember this, but a lot of these reactions, these catabolic and anabolic reactions, have a byproduct of heat, all right? So there's heat lost when these reactions happen. There's a lot of energy used, ATP, but then there's also heat lost, right? So even though we're breaking down and building up, and really things are staying the same, we're using ATP, energy, and we're losing a lot of, and we have a lot of heat being produced. So when the thyroid is active, it can help increase our body temperature, thermal regulation, increase your core temperature. So if you're cold, it can warm you up by having these reactions, more reactions happen in your body, and basically increase your metabolism, right? So more catabolic and anabolic reactions increases your metabolism. Right. What are some other effects of the thyroid hormone? It's important for bone growth, muscle growth, nervous system development. Also helps with, it helps target the sympathetic nervous system, okay? So increasing the thyroid hormone levels act on target cells of the sympathetic nervous system, increases receptors for sympathetic neurotransmitters. What is your sympathetic nervous system? That's your fight or flight, right? So thyroid helps with your sympathetic nervous system, so that's going to affect the things that your sympathetic nervous system affects: blood pressure, heart rate, right? Remember, sympathetic nervous system, eyes, pupils dilate, breathe in more, faster heart rate, stronger heart pump, right? All these things. So your thyroid helps, increases in thyroid hormone act on target cells of sympathetic nervous system. So the cells that the sympathetic nervous system would affect, your thyroid helps with the sympathetic nervous system to have, to increase its upregulation. So it helps make it more effective. But how does this process happen? Right, and this is, I don't need you to know every step here, but what we have is thyroglobulin, which is the large thyroid hormone precursor protein, right? You have these iodide ions secreted into the colloid, converted into iodine atoms that attach to thyroglobulin. So thyroglobulin and the iodine, notice that those two are very important. They come together. Skip down to the fourth bullet point. The iodinated thyroglobulin enters the follicle cells by endocytosis. Remember endocytosis? Taking something into the cell, active transport, but coming into the cell. It's converted to T4 and T3 by lysosomal enzymes. Lysosomes, remember those, can digest certain things in the cell. In this case, they help convert the iodinated thyroglobulin into T3 and T4. Eventually, it's released into the bloodstream, and the many target tissues can convert the T4 into the active T3, but the T4 lasts longer in your bloodstream, okay? And this is a diagram showing your follicular cells and your creation of your T3 and T4. All right, so what is the feedback loop? Remember, when we're talking about hormones, it's usually a negative feedback loop. We have some kind of stimulus or a receptor, the hormones produced, we have a return to homeostasis, and then the hormone is not produced anymore. That's the general rule of thumb for what we're taught for how hormones work, right? So we've already mentioned the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary, right? So there's the hypothalamus thyrotropin releasing hormone, right? First, and then you also have, and then next that goes to the anterior pituitary. Remember, you have trophic hormones that cause the release of other hormones. The anterior pituitary, second tier, is the thyroid stimulating hormone, which is released from the anterior pituitary. So the hypothalamus releases TRH, causes the anterior pituitary to release TSH, and the TSH stimulates the production of T3 and T4 by the follicle cells, which are at the thyroid. Right? And then T3 and T4 from follicle cells in the blood, growth and development of thyroid gland. Right? Then you also have a third tier, production of TRH from the hypothalamus to TSH increase when levels of T3 and T4 fall. So when your body, so the stimulus is when your body detects that T3 and T4 are dropping below the normal homeostatic range, right? Then more TRH from the hypothalamus is released, and then more TSH from the anterior pituitary, and then more T3 and T4 is made by the follicle cells. Also, if the body is exposed to cold temperatures, like we said, when these hormones help with bone growth, nervous system, muscle, but also just increasing your metabolism, increasing your body heat. So if you're exposed to cold temperatures, so if your body temperature starts to drop, or if your body's cold, you can increase your metabolism to basically increase the reactions that are happening in your body, therefore to raise your temperature up. So your body senses that the temperatures are dropping. Now I can release the TRH, then the TSH, and then stimulate more thyroid hormone and increase my metabolism and try to warm the body up. All right. This is just showing you a diagram of how that would work, right? So decreased levels of T3 and T4 in the blood or exposure to cold. Receptors in your hypothalamus detect that change, your hypothalamus. Since the hypothalamus secretes the TRH, which goes to the anterior pituitary, trophic hormone, that causes the anterior pituitary to secrete TSH, which then that controls the thyroid to produce T3 and T4, which are secreted into the blood, increases the levels of the T3 and T4 in the blood, increases your metabolic rate. Once you get back to normal, you stop the release of the TRH from the hypothalamus, and this whole process will stop temporarily until it is needed again. A couple of things that can happen. You can have hyperthyroidism, hyper too much, hypo too little. So if I have too much of my thyroid, too much action by my thyroid gland, too much T3 and T4, what happens? So if activity from my thyroid warms me up, increases my metabolism, if I have too much, then I could have weight loss because I'm burning too much energy. Heat intolerance, my body's too hot. So I would want it to be colder because I'd be naturally hotter if my thyroid was too active. And then you can also have some troubles with your blood pressure and your heart rhythm. Remember, it affects your sympathetic nervous system, which is your blood pressure, your heart rate. So you can have elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure, right? And also can have goiters. Hypothyroidism is the reverse. So this would be your metabolism is too slow. Therefore, you don't have the anabolic and catabolic reactions happening. Right? People call this back in the day. They used to say that I'm just big boned. You ever heard that? I'm big boned. I don't know if they say that anymore, but some people would say that like I'm just heavy, which is I ain't trying to hate on nobody who heavy. Ain't nothing wrong with that. But it can be If you have problems with weight loss, you may want to get your thyroid checked, because it could mean that you have a thyroid issue, and therefore your body's metabolism is slowed down. You don't produce enough T3 and T4. Therefore, you have a slower metabolism, and your body gains more weight. Also, you have a cold intolerance. Remember, producing T3 and T4 means that my body can warm up, but if I can't produce it, if I'm producing too little, now when it gets cold, I can't get warmer. So I'm intolerant to cold. You have a slower heart rate, lower blood pressure. So these are things that the doctor can check for. And if you have issues with with weight loss, these could be the issues. Okay. And this is goiter, which is basically an enlarged thyroid, which could obviously be problematic as a result of hyperthyroidism. Next, we want to move on to the parathyroid hormone and calcitonin, which are also very important. The chief cells secrete parathyroid hormone and thyroid secretes the calcitonin. So these two basically work in conjunction with each other, right? So, which affects our calcium ion concentration in the blood, which is very important, right? So your parathyroid hormone, let's start with that, secreted in response to a declining calcium ion level, right? So what happens? Your body recognizes that the calcium level in your blood has gone below the homeostatic range. That's the stimulus. It triggers the release of the parathyroid hormone. And what happens? The parathyroid hormone is released, calcium ions from the bone. It increases the release of calcium ions from the bone. So your body stores calcium in your bones, which we haven't talked about since we haven't gotten to the bone chapter on bone yet, which is coming. Stay tuned. But when parathyroid hormone is released, your body can break down some of your bone and release calcium ions from your bone. It increases absorption of dietary calcium by small intestines. So when you eat food that has calcium in it, it increases the ability of your small intestines to absorb that calcium from the food that you eat. Don't let it just come out in your poo. All right. Acts on the kidneys to convert inactive vitamin D into active form, calcitrol, which increases absorption of dietary calcium ions from small intestines as well. Right, and increases reabsorption of calcium ions from fluid in your kidneys. Right, so that's talking about sometimes when your blood is filtered in your kidneys, sometimes calcium is filtered out of your blood when it's filtered in your kidneys. But as it goes through the nephron tubules, your body will reabsorb what it needs that has been filtered out before it creates what we call urine, right? And so if your calcium ion levels are low in your body will reabsorb the calcium that has been filtered out of your bloodstream before it's created, before we release it from your body and turn it into urine. It'll filter it out and bring it back into the body, right? So that's what parathyroid hormone does. And so, breaking it down, remember, this is the same, that hopefully by now it starts looking familiar, the same formula. Stimulus, blood calcium ion level is too low. Receptor, in this case, your chief cells in your parathyroid gland, detect this low level of blood calcium ion. Control centers, your chief cells, increase parathyroid hormone secretion. So they secrete the parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone affects the different cells that we talked about, the kidneys, the bone, the intestines, to be able to bone to release more calcium, your intestines to absorb more calcium, your kidneys to also absorb more calcium, so it doesn't get excreted in your urine, and then your calcium ion levels return back to normal, and we stop the secretion of the parathyroid hormone. And so that's just showing you that whole diagram there. So just start seeing this trend in this formula. Stimulus, something gets out of the homeostatic range, receptor, control center, effector response, and then basically it circles back. Once we get back into our homeostatic range, then we stop creating the hormone. Right, then we also have calcitonin. So we have parathyroid hormone. Calcium levels get too low, we can increase those calcium levels. So calcium levels should be here. They come too low. Parathyroid hormone helps us bring it back up. What if your calcium levels go too high? Calcitonin, produced and secreted by the parafollicular cells, that's back in your thyroid gland, released when calcium ion level in blood increases above normal, right? And the primary target for the calcitonin is the osteoclast. Osteoclasts, what they do is take calcium in your body and bring it into the bone, therefore bringing it out of the bloodstream, right? So that's, so the osteoclast, my mistake. Osteoblasts bring it into build new bone. Sorry, the osteoclasts break down bone. So the osteoclasts are the ones that release the calcium from the bone, and the osteoblasts build new bone, therefore taking calcium that's in your body and putting it into your bone. Therefore, it will reduce the levels of the calcium in your bloodstream. Sorry, I got that switched around. Osteoclast. The calcitonin targets the osteoclast and inhibits their activity. So less bone is broken down, so less calcium is released into the bloodstream, but the osteoblasts keep building bone, so they're taking calcium from the bloodstream, and we're not returning any to the bloodstream. Right, and so this is just showing you, sorry for that little confusion, but this is just showing you a diagram, putting it all together. Follicle cells, parafollicular cells, and chief cells, and the hormones they produce and what their effects are. We also have this disease called osteoporosis. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. It's an unfortunate disease, basically where your body, osteo, bone, porosis, pores in your bone. So your body basically has more pores, more holes in your bone than normal. And a common treatment for osteoporosis is calcitonin, right? Calcitonin causes your body to inhibit the osteoclasts, which break down your bone, but still allow the osteoblasts to build up your bone. And therefore, it's something that you could use, you administer more calcitonin and increase their levels, and therefore it would slow the process of osteoporosis, which makes a lot of sense. And that's the end of section 16.3.